So we'll go ahead and start the session. My name is Man Martin, and this is the Writer's Toolbox. And I'm going to go down the table here. To my immediate left is Lynn Cullen, whose recent novels are Twain's Inn and Mrs. Poe. And Veena Rao, whose debut novel is The Purple Lotus. And Andy Davidson, whose recent novel is The Boatman's Daughter. Right? The Hollow Kind. And you have a novel coming out very soon, right? In October. No? I'm sorry.
It's a paperback release.
Oh, I see. I see. I thought I would just start by asking each of you, we'll just start with Lynn and move down the table. Can you give us, sorry, you know, you can't help where the place cards are put. A quick overview of your writing process, starting from germ of idea to, you know, beautiful, magnificent work of fiction.
Okay, we don't have enough time for that, but I will just say my techniques and things I have to go through to do a novel are different, I would think, than everyone here, because we each have our own, but historical fiction has its own challenges, and I write based on real people in history, and that is the easiest and hardest genre to write on. It's easy because I have real people and the events in history to frame my story around. It's hardest because there's so much to know, and it is fiction. I have to know how to plot and character, you know, make a character out of these historical figures. So there's lots and lots of research that there wouldn't normally be, but I'm not crying about it. I love it. And I also travel a lot. I had this thing that was kind of broken during COVID, but previously to COVID, I have made a point of going to every scene in all my books. And I do historical fiction, so the places really might have changed a lot, but just being like, I had several books that were set in Spain, just knowing what the air was like there, I don't know, it's just important to me. It's really fun doing that. I was just thinking about Mrs. Poe and how well I had to get to know New York, and looking at the layers of time there. But anyhow, so then there's gathering all that info, but I don't wait till I have all my research to get going. I start as soon as I can, because I want to see what happens. When I write a book, I'm not one that plots it out a whole lot. I like to know where my ending is. I usually have a question, like for Mrs. Poe, I wanted to know, as I mentioned yesterday in a panel, I wanted to know why Poe went from the pinnacle of success in 1845 with The Raven to total despair and just being a total reject 1 year later, losing it all in 1 year. I had to answer what happened to him. So anyhow, there's a question that I have to answer with each book. And I write every day, hours at a time. Some days I don't write a sentence in those hours. It's really frustrating. We were just talking about how long it takes to write. And if you're doing a novel, you just kind of suck it up and know that's how it is. It's a real endurance race. Not a race, it's real endurance long, is what it is. But it's worth it.
I have a quick follow-up, and I'm just gonna, am I projecting loud enough y'all can hear? Someone, okay, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna lean in. I've been treated for COVID, so I'm good. So then I have just a follow-up question. You tend to write about characters, you know, women who are, I hate to say in the shadows, but who might be shadowed by a more prominent, you know, Twain or Poe or whomever. How do you spot the character who seems to be on the periphery that's going to be the center of your fiction? How do you sense that this is her?
Well, like I said yesterday, for Mrs. Poe, it was, I was going through my own trauma. My husband had encephalitis and a brain injury, and I was thinking, how am I going to support myself with my writing? And came across the reason Poe fell from grace is he had an affair in 1845, and it was with this woman. And the minute I started reading about her, I knew I had to write her, because she was also struggling. Her husband had left her, and she was trying to support her daughters on writing. And that alone made me love her, because we all know how hard it is to support ourselves on writing. And here she did when no one did, and she was actually successful. She sold her poems and supported herself. So there's always some personal thing that rings a bell. But yeah, they emerge from the shadows. Like my most recent book is The Woman with the Cure, and it's about the polio vaccine, the race for the polio vaccine, and finding this woman in the shadows who actually had everything to do with the vaccine, but you never hear of her. And it took me a long time to find her, because she was just kind of buried in all the polio literature. But once you find her, she's everywhere. But anyhow, I feel like I want to hear these guys.
Yes, yes. So Veena, tell us your general process.
Yeah. Yeah, so every story begins with a germinal idea, right? So mine began with just 2 words. So I always wanted to become a writer. When I was about 12, I declared that I would grow up to be a world famous writer. I thought it would be just very easy. So of course life got in the way. Because I was very fond of writing, I became a journalist. And then of course I got married, had a child, moved to the United States. And then I launched a news publication of my own, which took all my time and focus and energy. So around 2009, I'm sorry, I read 2 books, very powerful books. One was The Kite Runner, and one was A Thousand Splendid Suns, both by Cullen. And I fell in love, so much in love with the characters, that I was, inspired to write. So I sat in front of a blank word page, and the first 2 words I typed were purple lotus. And so, why purple lotus? I guess it's because the lotus is such a beautiful symbol of rising above one's circumstance. It's a symbol of self-awakening. So I guess I knew what the trajectory of the story would be, but I had no story. And so the story was something that which unfolded as I went along. So that was the genesis of Purple Lotus. And I taught myself to write fiction. Nothing in my background, has prepared me to write creative work. I'm a journalist, though. I'm a news journalist. So writing news reports is entirely different. You're writing concise, direct language, right? There's no creativity involved there. So this is something I had to teach myself, and I did that by reading other authors, other immigrant authors like Chimamanda Adichie, and a lot of other immigrant authors. And then I discovered, after 3 years of writing, that my manuscript was bloated. It was about 120,000 words, and all the querying that I did, it was met with no success, just rejection after rejection after rejection. And so I hired a developmental editor, and she helped me sculpt the book into shape. And what was left was what every single word propelled the story forward, which meant that a lot of characters, scenes, about 40,000 words had to be cut down. So anyway, my book finally, I never did find an agent, and so finally my book was published after I won a manuscript contest, which is hosted annually by my publisher, She Writes Press. It's open to women of color annually. And so winning this contest meant a book deal and a publicity deal. So that's how my book came out in 2020, fall of 2020.
So A real quick follow-up question, and this is going to be a huge can of worms. As a writer with a foot in two very different cultures, can you briefly tell us how you navigate that? Is that something that gives you opportunity, or is it just a huge headache?
Well, for my first book,
yes.
I was well within my comfort zone because I was writing about this immigrant from India who was in an abusive situation, which is, and you know, a lot of things from this book were inspired by my own life or the lives of people around me. And of course, there are secondary characters who are Southern, who are Southern natives, and there's a Russian immigrant. But they're all characters who are based on people I know very well. They're like family to me. So I wasn't really outside my comfort zone writing this. So I wouldn't say that. I think being from another culture, living here in the South, it has enriched my book in ways. Because it's helped me find this niche in the literary world. I think it fills a need in the literary landscape.
Okay. Andy, will you tell us your writing process?
I start with notebooks. So anytime I start a new project, I'll get a notebook. And I think it was in the pandemic that I told my wife, I went to her and I said, I think I have a problem. Because I had been steadily collecting notebooks over the years and not using them, and so I was trying to reorganize shelves, and I just had this pile of blank notebooks, and so I have not bought a notebook in probably 2 years at this point, but I still have a lot of blank notebooks. But so I'm kicking a notebook problem as far as I can tell. But I start with those drawings, notes, ideas. Maybe an idea for a project begins just as a what-if question, or this convergence that Gaiman talks about, the idea of two things colliding, or three things. In the case of my latest book, it was turpentine farming in Georgia, cosmic horror, and just my own 1980s childhood, I guess. So how do you put those things together? So I figure all of that out. The story sort of emerges with notes I make about characters and what they want. I eventually write an outline, and after the outline, I sit down and I start plugging away. But I always try to know the end before I start, so I know where I'm headed. In terms of the time I spend writing, I don't have a structured writing time. I find that I can go for periods and not do it. And there's eventually a point where it starts to bug me. It starts to become an itch that I need to scratch, and I have to sit down. And once I sit down and start writing, I can be there in a project for 3 months, just steadily, every day or every few days, or there'll be set times, like a few hours in the evening that I'll have weekly to sit down. And eventually, the book comes out of that. So the edits and the revisions tend to take even more time because they go through my beta reader, my wife, they go through my agent before they even end up with the publisher or the editor.
Could I say one thing that you brought up, Veena? I thought that was great, how you sat down and the words purple lotus came to you. And it made me realize the book I'm working on now, I had my research together like usual, and I had an idea where I wanted to go with it, but I couldn't get started. And I asked my daughter, I said that, I don't know how to get this book started. It was all like that pressure. I wanted to write the book, but I couldn't figure out how to start it. And she said, well, Mom, I like books that start with a word. And I instantly do what I always do. Oh, I'll never do that. And just as I did that, I realized I know the word. I know the word. Now, the book has changed, but having that one word really helped for, getting it started and actually knowing the whole project. But that one word, and so if you have a word that...
What was the word?
Imagine. Because Marilyn Monroe, it's about Marilyn Monroe and her only female photographer. Marilyn Monroe is always going, imagine. But she really meant it because everything about her was imagine. So
there's so many interesting topics that have been broached here, and this may end up, this next part may be a little scattershot, just because I was interested. Andy talked about having a notebook, and I wanted to ask Veena and Lynn, is there any, is there any materials you generate or collect that is not meant for the writer, not meant for the reader to see? This is simply the writer's tool. And before we go to you, Andy, can you tell us what is in your notebook? Is there anything in there that, that is just, okay, I need background on this, or I just need a sense of this. This is not intended for the reader in any way.
Yeah, my drawings, no one will ever see those.
Now you're all very curious about those
Yeah.
drawings, aren't you?
So I have these sketches. An example is, I have this idea that one of the things I have to figure out before I can start writing is the key image, right? Like this thing that really encapsulates what the book is about. And so you mentioned the boatman's daughter. Once I had that key image, I was ready to go. And that image was this young woman like holding her 12-year-old brother in her arms. And her 12-year-old brother has the tail of an alligator, So once I sort of figured that out, like there's this sort of salvation thing going on in the book with the protector and all of that, it started to write. But I will never show that to anybody because it was terrible. It was the most hideous looking, ugly thing you can imagine.
Can you tell us, do you have any corollary materials?
Yes, well, they're not in a notepad. They
Right.
probably just saved Word files or YouTube links. But for my next book, which is set in rural North Georgia, I've been collecting material, and that might include, sermons.
Sermons?
Yeah,
Okay.
sermons, or I don't know what else. But plenty of material that is basis for my research, but which will probably not be, probably won't get into the book as is.
So the sermons, for example, are these sermons you
They
write
give me
in
a
the voice
sense.
of the character, or you find a sermon that
No,
you
I
see?
find a sermon to give me a sense of what the culture, the local culture.
Mhm.
Okay, my book is about casual racism, so I try to find, for me, it's very important for my book to have enough, for me to have done enough research to get it accurate. So I'm looking for accuracy in portraying the culture there, and so any material I can get, I just collect, which may or may not end up being in my book. That's what
First of all, I have where I am recording my thoughts instead of notebooks. I wish I was that organized. I have notes all over the house. I really am undiagnosed ADD. I know I am, and so I have notes everywhere, and I also write a lot in margins of my books that I use for research. I love a book that's a mess that I've worked with. I have notes on it, and more than that, I cross things out or really underline things. The messier they are, the more I feel like, yeah, that was my source. But as far as what will never see day, or my first drafts, I revise like crazy, and I'm really ashamed of my first drafts. They're awful. The writing is awful, but you have to go through those to get where you're going. But yeah, I'm actually ashamed. I only have two readers really. I use my agent and my editor, and I'm even ashamed for them to see them. But that's the process.
So, Veena and Andy, you mentioned the beta reader. Do you have a person that you trust to read your work?
Oh yes, several people. My son is my first reader, always. I don't think I could have finished this book or, been a published author without his support. Yeah, so every time I finish a chapter, he reads it and he gives me his commentary, and which is almost always very, very highly critical.
Leave it to a child.
Yes, but yes, he's my first reader.
So Andy talked about drawing. Maybe you won't confess to drawing pictures. We'll sell doodles after this. But is there anything we'll just go down the table again, starting with Lynn. Like, is there music you listen to? Do you avoid listening to music? Do you ever act out a scene? Is there shows or dramas that are helpful to you? Maybe as a counterpoint to your own writing? Lynn, if you want to respond to that, go ahead, please.
You got it.
I wanted to say that I cry along with my my characters. But yeah, I think I'm at my creative best when I'm meditating, or I'm taking a walk in the park. That's where I get these flashes of inspiration, and that's where I create most of my scenes. Yes, that's all I can think of.
So, for example, do you meditate at the start of the day? Do you do a little writing and then?
No, I meditate at the start of the day, and that's where I'm thinking of what I'm going to write about, and then I go jot it down on a notepad like Andy does, and then I sit down to write when I have the time.
Lynn, what about you?
You have a good point that I like to start a day knowing what I want to write that day, and so even though I don't have each of my chapters in advance laid out, I always like to know when each start of a chapter where I want to go, and generally I don't get that whole chapter done for a week or two, but just setting a goal, and not for word count. That drives me crazy. I'm not one of those, I'm going to write 1,000 words. I don't even know what 1,000 words is. So I just want to get a scene. Maybe that is my goal. Can I get this scene that might be within the chapter? Yeah, that's really how I operate. No music. So it's too distracting.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody does that, because I'm easily distracted. Though I sit outside, my favorite place is to sit outside, watch the birds, let it come or not.
Do you ever have to take a break from writing and do something different? Perhaps take a walk, or find a gin or anything like that to break you out of your shell a bit?
Yeah, walking is great. I'll tell you, the best are showers. I don't ever stop and say, I'm going to shower and get an idea. I should, but that's when they come, at night. I think it's whenever you've totally let down your hair, then your ideas come to you.
So Andy, what about you? What rituals do you have to, and I'm also curious, do you also say, okay, today, in this chapter, we will move from point A to point B, this will be revealed?
Maybe. It depends. I tend to try and keep a chapter pretty short and focused on a single turn happening somewhere in the chapter for the characters.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah. So it may be that it follows the outline. It may not if things are shifting and changing underfoot as I move through the book. But with music, I started this thing with my first book because it was rooted in West Texas and sort of this cowboy myth culture of Texas, and so I filled up a playlist of songs that were all country western songs from the 1980s when the book is set, and stuff I remember as a kid and stuff I discovered through just listening to music and kind of trying to, it helps me sort of figure out the world, right, of the characters. But at some point that process, and I don't listen to this while I'm writing, I just kind of put it together as a way of saying this is the world, but somehow it morphed from just the world into being like an almost sort of emotional soundtrack or a story beat soundtrack for the film or for the book project, and it sort of becomes a film in your head, maybe for me, but it's gotten weirder progressively with each book, right? So the cohesiveness breaks down, whereas you have a song track of all country songs. For the second book, it's kind of got some gospel thrown in there because there's a crazy preacher, and then there's a little bit of country in there too because it's set in the South and Arkansas. But then the third book, it became about the 1980s with this mother and her kid, and so things crept in, like not just first wave stuff, but like, or new wave stuff, but like the theme from Super Friends was in there, you know, because there's a 10-year-old kid at the heart of the book, and it's 1989. But by the fourth one that I'm working on right now, so the track starts with, the playlist starts with like the theme from the Hammer Dracula film, and somewhere in the middle there's Waylon Jennings and you know, Britney Spears is in there, and I want to say like, oh gosh, I think there's a Tupac number in there, and then it ends with Dolly Parton. So it's kind of wild now, but like I said, it kind of helps me move through the narrative in my mind in terms of what's happening emotionally.
And if I may say, each book, it's like children. If you have more than one children, you learn that if say it's your second child, you think, I know just how to raise this child, because I did the first one. They're so totally different, each kid, and so you have to re-parent with each child. It's like that. We're parents of books. Each one, it's a whole different ball game, and maybe because we change too as people, but the subjects of course change.
So, talking about the difficulty, and Lynn and I were chatting before the panel. Let's get to emotional stuff. I was in a phase, may still be there, working on a story, and my beautiful, lovely wife said, "Remember this. Remember this. Remember how you feel right now," because evidently I was unaware. I go through the same cycles of highs and lows every time. I'm assuming everybody in the room has been through lows. What do you do, or maybe you don't experience this, when you just think, you know what, I'm just tapped out. There's nothing left here. I've got nothing to give. How do you, or do you, how do you get through that moment? Hopefully only a moment.
Gee, I probably, anybody want to take this first? Because, you know, I want to think about it a second.
Sure.
But,
Veena, do you want to jump in?
I walk away from it, you know, like leave it alone, or keep worrying it until it's the equivalent of when you erase too much and you tear the paper. You know, I've done that plenty of times, but sometimes I even start a new document with a blank page, and I may look at what I was writing that's tripping me up and try to rewrite it from a blank setting, you know, and sometimes it just clears your mind, or you see something in a different way, but typically walk away from it, yeah.
So, I find it very useful, of course, walking away, that's important, and also, you know, just reading books of a similar genre, or reading your favorite author's books. Somehow it never fails to inspire me. Suddenly I can think of something each time I hit a roadblock, writer's block. So, and also meditation, you know, walking away for a couple of days and then meditating or going on a long walk, somehow it calms me and it gets ideas flowing again.
And this is a common problem. And so if you feel this is part of the whole life, because the story is not going to flow the whole time. And I've always felt the writer's block is just simply telling you something's wrong with your story. Nature's way of telling you. And so for me, I end up going back to the research, thinking I'm approaching something wrong. And I also go back to where it was working in the book. So I start from there, think, you know, that all worked. Why did that work? And look back in the research for maybe a different way forward. But it's a horrible feeling, writer's block. But it's good to know. That's one nice thing about writing for a long time, is you know it goes, and you have confidence that you'll find your story.
I just want to add to that reading helps me too, like going to a few key books that matter to me as a writer. And just rereading those books or rereading even a passage or a chapter can help loosen that up.
So do you read in your own genre, Andy? And what are give us some titles of key books you go to as sort of wellsprings?
Okay, so I do read in my own genre. Lots of people, not just, because I'm asked to or whatever, but I read people. I love them. But key texts that I go back to are things that tend to be older, things like Ray Bradbury stories. His story Kaleidoscope is something that always just blows my mind every time I read it. If not Kaleidoscope, I think about something like The Foghorn, this really obscure story that most people don't know about this poor sad beast. But Bradbury's language, I go back to, I mentioned Charles Portis yesterday with True Grit, but there's also The Night of the Hunter by Davis Grubb. Some people remember the movie with Robert Mitchum, but they don't remember that it was based on a book prior to that. Charles Lawton adapted that from a book that was written by a West Virginia writer named Davis Grubb. Beautiful book, one of the most beautiful books ever written, I think. So yeah, those are a few.
I just wanted to quickly add, and this is just a thought, I suppose one could use ChatGPT for inspiration. I have never done it, and I don't plan to do it, but it's just a thought.
What are some books you read though? Is there anything you turn to, authors you turn to? Do you read? You actually have mentioned this. You read something similar to what you've written. I guess maybe we have the answer because you mentioned it. So you have some. I'm sorry, Coach Rob. Lynn, who are some writers you return to? And do you avoid reading something in your own genre?
Not necessarily avoid it, but I tend to like literary fiction, not necessarily historical, though I can like that. And if I find something that I love the writing in it, it is inspiring just to reread it. Each book I tend to reread something. Last book I read, Commonwealth by Ann Patchett. I kept reading that. I don't know why, it just kind of spoke to me. Mrs. Poe, I read Wuthering Heights over and over. And there's others like that.
So, just in terms of research or anything, when you hear the word tool, we might think of technology, and we were discussing this somewhat before the panel. From pencil, which is a technology, to Chat GPT or AI, what are the tools, the physical tools you access, and how do you use them in your writing? If that question's clear, I hope it is.
Is it clear if I answer, I just use my laptop and know that makes me sick to think about using any AI. It really does.
Do you write longhand ever?
No. Well, sometimes you're forced into it, like you'll be traveling and you'll get an idea and then all my notes are always, longhand.
Do you use Google Docs or something else?
Word. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
So I use my Microsoft Surface and a Word document to write. But I also use the Notepad app on my smartphone a lot to jot down ideas.
Right.
And I also use Grammarly and the thesaurus a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it. I cannot think of anything else.
I think of a toolbox for a writer like on a metaphorical level.
Right.
Yeah. So
but in this case, we're actually talking about inches and flowers.
Yeah, same thing. Laptop, notebooks, pen, paper. I mean, it's not anything profound, but everything has a different tool, right? Every purpose. A tool has a purpose. That's what I've learned this in the course of the summer in remodeling a house or working on a house that we just purchased. If you have the right tool for the job is much easier, right? So, in terms of the metaphorical, I always think about on writing, Stephen King talks about the writer's toolbox, and he has that whole thing about what's in your toolbox. grammar? Is it language? Is it those sorts of things? So yeah.
Thank you for bringing up that book. I'd forgotten, when I was listening, I was thinking, I want to mention that book. Even though I love, in fact, when he veers away from talking about his tools, just talking about inspirations in his life, it just was really powerful. I love reading that book.
Yeah, and those things are part of that toolbox, right? Like,
Exactly.
in addition to just the physical tools of writing, we've got the things we turn to for inspiration. Like you mentioned, are there shows that we watch? Are there stories that we return to? Those sorts of things.
So there's two issues I want to talk about now. One is we talked about writers who read as examples, but also writers who read as instructors. It's giving you direct instruction how to write. And I also want to talk about language and grammatical choices. How do you determine, do you have a general rubric for, you've got synonyms, I'm going to use this one instead of this one. Here's a phrase I'm going to gravitate to. But first let's start with writers you look to as saying, okay, here's an introduction to your craft that you find inspiration. Or writers, craft books that you think, other people like this, it just drives me crazy.
Well, I guess I could hop in here. Stephen King's on writing, I love that, because it is not such a how-to book. That's why I like it. It's somehow it just really inspired me, and not even telling you how to do it, it did. But as far as when I was starting out, the really crucial book to me was Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. And it's the whole concept of the bird by bird is what helped me survive, because are you all familiar with that? Yeah, okay. That just made me feel better, trying to write a novel, just knowing you don't have to know the whole novel, you just have to do it scene by scene, bird by bird. And that was really empowering when I was starting out.
So Nina, what is this? Are there any
Unfortunately, I have not read a single book on the craft of
maybe
writing.
better off. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think writing is an art. But for me, when like I said, I taught myself to write fiction, right? So, and then I had this bloated 120,000 word manuscript. And so that's when I hired a developmental editor. And for me, that process it taught me the craft of writing. I learned so much about writing during that process. But I guess I should read more books about the craft of writing.
Whatever works is my philosophy. Andy, is there anyone other than Stephen King that you look to?
Don't ever read Robert McKee.
Okay.
I tell you that because I read Robert McKee. So if you've not read a craft book, keep in that pure, happy space of not reading Robert McKee.
What's the title of his book?
Story. Yeah. So his famous book is Story. There's he's written a couple of others. There's one on character that I think actually is really good. And I haven't read his book on dialogue yet, but those are all on my shelf. I've got a few things that I pick up every now and then and flip through. The books I've read cover to cover, I haven't read in a while, but there's a book by a writer whose last name is Cowgill, Cowgill. I think it's Linda is her first name, and it's how to write a screenplay. It's just a very simple title, but it's really good. I mean, it's very good about structure and plot. If you are stuck and the bird by bird method isn't getting you to the end.
It doesn't tell you much.
Yeah.
Started
But
anyway.
her book's great. Especially I like her stuff about shitty first drafts. And
Yes.
how you have to give yourself the freedom to be sloppy and awful. But the Cowgill book is really good for just nuts and bolts. Simple. It's not like McKee. There's no really complicated diagrams. McKee tries to turn writing into math at times, and that's a little bit of a problem for me. But I think he's really good. I do think his ideas are great. John Gardner's book, The Art of Fiction for Young Writers, Anybody ever tried to read that or read it?
You didn't care for it.
Oh yeah. I've had it on my shelf for 20 years and I've never read it. I bought it when I was in graduate school and I thought I should read this book and I never did. I picked it up a couple of weeks ago for the first time thinking now's the time. I got 5 pages into it and I was like, no way, I'm not reading this. This is the most highfalutin, snobbish, elitist book on writing I've ever read. So yeah, I may be getting rid of that one. But yeah, McKee is someone I like, and the Cowgill book is a good one. And of course there's other books like Save the Cat and things like that, which are really good too.
I remember once upon a time reading Strunk and White, which is really basic, but yeah, I think it's kind of, you need to read that.
Yeah, actually, King talks about that in On Writing. I think Strunk and White is his style manual that goes in the toolbox, right?
Right. Yeah, everybody should know that.
And I just destroyed the equipment.
Everybody knows
And I'll take the privilege as the moderator. So Andy and I will disagree. I'm John Gardner. Oh my goodness. But looks like Save the Cat, and you may be different. I've read it or started it, and the reaction is at first, this is great. This is the roadmap I've been looking for. And then after a while, it's like, I hate myself. I hate everything this book stands for. I hate the universe. Books I'll recommend to you, and one of them I can remember the author, and I can't remember the title, and the other one I can remember the title, not the author. Reading Like a Writer. They're both books on reading. Does anybody know who it is?
Is that Ralph Fletcher?
No, she's
Okay.
Reading Like a Writer is excellent. And then George Saunders has a book on Russian writers, and it's this freaking long title. It's got rain and swimming in it. And I like those books. To me, I felt like, oh wow, I was inspired both by their perception of literature and their. But there's, one thing we've seen is there's different routes here. There isn't a right way. There's going to be a right way for you. I do want to talk about getting down to the sentence level. Something that's moody and atmospheric. If it's something horror or whatever. How do you select phrases, individual vocabulary words, images? Is there a way you do that? Is there a sort of preference? Andy, I'll start with you because.
Yeah, you're mixing it up. See, yesterday I got all the time in the world to think of good answers because I'm on the end. So I tell my students in my creative writing classes, because language is a hard thing to teach. I was in a graduate program, and the thing that like sparked my evolution, I guess, as a writer, when I went from maybe a kind of mediocre writing student to a strong writing student, was a graduate instructor told me, Tom Franklin, the writer, turn up the fire under your language. And that's all he said. He didn't tell me how to do it, but I think I instinctively knew kind of what he meant. Try to be more lyrical, try to be more poetic, give it a shot. You may fall on your face, but try. And so I tell my students that, and I tell them, try for like one flourish a page, give it a shot, give it a metaphor shot, give it a simile shot. Look for a moment where that really great and appropriate bit of lyricism works in your story. Don't spray it all over the page. Don't just be purple and start being flowery for the sake of it. But look for those moments where you can vary your sentence structure. You can write a short sentence that's a staccato beat that follows a longer, more maybe mellifluous or flowing sentence. So yeah, it's a hard thing. I don't know, but how you guys feel about it. But it's a hard thing to teach or to tell people how to do.
Is there a situation, in when you're building a scene where you can say, okay, this spot needs, a short declarative sentence, or this spot needs some poetry? are there ways you can determine that? What are you looking for?
I would say rhythm. So depending on the action of the scene too, right? Like if you're, let's say you're writing this is not a great example because I kind of hate reading fight scenes in books sometimes. But let's say you've got a fight scene or you've got a heated exchange between characters. Well, that's not the time for long lyrical sentences. That's the time for short sentences that mirror the frame of mind, that mirror the frame of the rapidness of their heartbeat, you know, those sorts of things. Same thing with like sounds, and there are ways to throw the word thunk or splat into a manuscript that can be really effective, even though it sounds kind of goofy to say it. And then there are times when an entire page can be one paragraph and it makes sense because you're in a character's head and there's a rambling sense of thought to thought, or you know, the movement mimics something on the page, mimics something that is in the narrative. That makes sense.
I think visualizing the scene helps me come up with the right choice of words, and also just delving deep within myself, writing from deep within myself, I guess. Is that an answer?
That's a very good answer.
Okay. And also, what was I going to say? And it depends on the scene you're writing, like Andy mentioned. There are scenes where you are writing about the character's inner monologue. You're writing about your inner thoughts, feelings, and that's when you can explore with a flourish of words.
So if you're writing a scene, you want to visualize it. Does your attempt to visualize it, does it shape the actual scene you're going to write?
Yes.
You determine. Okay. So
Yeah,
can you
absolutely.
elaborate on that a bit, if you would?
Well, I just see the scene, like I
Right.
said, when I'm walking or meditating. I actually see the scene, I feel what the characters are feeling. And then I come back and hopefully I can get it by the time I come back and get down to write. I still have that feeling, you know? And I can still feel what my characters are feeling. And then it becomes easier to just express it.
So Lynn, when you're writing like historical fiction, we're talking about visualizing the scene and finding the right word. How do you search for, how do you recognize the detail that sets us in a particular way of seeing the world, or a particular world at a particular time?
That's half the fun and the problem, you know, with historical fiction, to avoid anachronisms. And so I talk about tools. I am constantly checking the thesaurus to see about when words came into use and phrases came into use. Actually, that's, again, I have a frame of using the history to work from. But I was thinking about what you were saying. All of your explanations are great. I really appreciate hearing them. But also, character has so much to do with your choices. What would your character say? That totally affects everything. And then the other thing is, it's such a part of the art part, and I talked about this on a panel yesterday, hearing the music. You could actually, when things are working, you hear it, and I think what I mean by the music is what you said, it's the rhythm. It sounds right in your ear. And you know when you don't have it, everything's just clunky.
What is it you're looking to know about, and this is for everybody, but we'll start with Lynn again. What is it that you're looking to know about your characters? You know, how much information do you need, or does it develop as you write the character? And what does that look like in your process?
It's definitely something that develops, even though you might think you know them, and you have to have a very good idea of them to get started, and a real attachment to them. But just like getting to know anyone, that evolves over time. And with me, again, historical research, I'll learn things about them that change my mind. You know, with this Marilyn Monroe book, trying to understand her. There's some things that she did that I just could not understand. So I am meeting with a psychologist to just understand her using her life.
Just in terms of characters, is there specific information you want to know about a character before you start your life, or you need to discover to make the character effective?
Well, when I start to write, I see the character's personality, the character traits, but I don't see the story fully. I have a general outline, but I don't see where they're going to go. Let's say a couple of chapters down the line. So that's just my process, just discovering where and getting to know the characters better. That's my approach to writing.
How closely are they based on people you actually know?
Well, for the Purple Lotus, my first book, all the characters, or at least let's say 60% of the characters were based on people I know. I see a little bit of myself in the protagonist, Tara. But for my next book, the protagonist is nothing like me, and I don't know of anybody who's just like her. She's completely fictional. Well, that's the joy of writing, I guess, to create characters you don't know, and you are looking forward to getting to know as you write the story.
I want to come to conflict in characters too, but tell us, Andy, what is it you're looking to know about your characters, and do you discover them? What's your process for developing a character?
I just want to know what they want. I think for me initially, and I agree with what you said about you don't really know the whole story when you start thinking about who the character is. Usually for me, it's what's the problem in this character's life, and how does that problem, how do they react to that problem? How do they, so like in my last book, there's an immediate problem that introduces us to the main character where she needs to get out of a bad marriage. And so what she does and how she chooses to get out of that marriage says something about her. And then over the course of the book, there are other things that she wants as well. In place of that, what does she want? And does that change over the course of the story? So it's an evolving process.
And this, I want to pick up on that. How long do we have? A couple minutes? 4 minutes. 4 minutes, excellent. A teacher of mine said fiction is about a thing, and the other thing, which is the sort of sin-like and strangely helpful information. So, yeah, and sort of the woman's running from a bad marriage, and she's going to encounter this cosmic evil. Is there a way that you look at, I'm not sure I have vocabulary, a peripheral problem for the character that's somehow going to fit thematically with your story? Does that make sense? Is that something you do typically? And is that something you search for?
In a way, the cosmic evil is almost the peripheral problem. It's the complicating factor,
right.
But there's so much wrong in her life with her relationship with her son, with the fact that she's trying to take charge of this large estate that she's inherited that's decrepit and overrun and falling apart, and she's in over her head essentially. And so there's a lot of complications and a lot of problems that come in. There's a character in the book who wants to take the land from her and is trying to figure out every way that he can. And so the thing that's in the woods is the source of all of the greed and the anxiety that's around the book, but it's just feeding into other problems that she has.
Either for you, like, is there peripheral things that, or maybe indeed it actually is the central issue in a subtle way?
And like Andy said, the main problem that the protagonist is going through leads to all these other problems that she has to. For instance, Tara, the protagonist of Purple Lotus, she's an immigrant who's trapped in a bad marriage. And she also comes from a patriarchal family that wants her to make peace with the circumstance, not, keep her husband happy. And then through the course of the book, she learns to stand up for herself, and she flees. She flees, you know, she leaves home. And then come her other secondary problems, very problems. You know, she has to fend for herself. She is financially dependent on her husband. So how does she take care of herself? And all these issues are secondary issues that come up. So yeah, I think dealing with, you know, when you're writing the whole novel, you know, it's not just the central problem, it's the central problem that leads to all these other peripheral problems that characters have to deal with.
Lynn, for you, we're actually out of time. Can Lynn make one more comment?
Yes, one more comment.
Just one more comment. This is it now. I think this question is apropos to end with you because, you know, there's a way in which Mrs. Poe, the characters, the central character of your story, who may be a peripheral character in history, their dilemmas match thematically. How do you acquire that? Or that's the wrong word, I know, but that's why I'm asking the question. How do you get there? Do you recognize it instantly? Is there a way in which you develop that?
It's going to take more than a minute, so I'm just going to say it comes in the research. These people jump out of the woodwork, and I do know instantly, that's my way in, because that's the whole thing about telling a story, isn't it? Finding that angle in, and that's what drove me so crazy about my most recent book that came out. I could not find the way into that polio vaccine race. I knew I wanted to tell that story, but I did not know the way in. And once you find that angle, then you know it.
I just want to quickly add that there's a deeper problem, the real problem, and then there are immediate problems
Right.
the character has to deal with.
Right. Folks, thank you all so much for your attention. Let's give them a round of applause.